Good people, I hope you remember this, the ROG Flow Z13. It was a device that took everything about portable gaming to a whole new level by introducing an ecosystem. It was a thin and light 2-in-1 laptop that had really good battery life and specs, and if you were craving for desktop class performance, you were able to achieve that by plugging something like the XG mobile dock with an RTX 3080, and it was just a unique product that was done right. However, I was a bit skeptical about the support for this ecosystem because the one question that always boggled my mind was, would ASUS continue to roll out new products to keep up with the latest hardware with this proprietary external docking solution? Well, they sure did prove me wrong, my friends, because what I have in front of me is the next step towards that ultimate portable gaming setup. Folks, meet the Flow Z13. It's a tablet. More specifically, a gaming tablet running Windows with some insane specs. It's got Intel's 12th Gen Alder Lake CPUs, an RTX GPU, a faster screen, and it's 12 millimeters thin. Like, do you realize how much power that's sitting inside this beast? It's absolutely insane. Now, coming to think of it, I would classify this as the gaming version of the Microsoft Surface Pro 8 because, it's got the kickstand in it. Kind of, looks like one, to be honest, aside from the looks, but we'll talk about that later. Now, I've been using this thing for a few weeks, and let me tell you, it's awesome, but there are some quirks that you need to know about, and I hope by the end of this video, you'll get a clear picture as to who this thing is catered towards. Now, before I get into the specs of the Flow Z13, I do want to quickly mention that ASUS has refreshed the Flow X13 with AMD's new Ryzen 9 6900HS CPU and an RTX 3050 Ti. That's a pretty good spec refresh compared to last year's model that only featured a GTX 1650. Other than that, it's basically the same chassis offering the same set of features. The Z13, on the other hand, is a completely different animal. It starts at $1,500, and that gets you a Core i5-12500H with 4 performance cores and 8 efficiency cores for a total of 16 threads, 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5 memory at 5200 MHz, half a terabyte of storage, and integrated graphics. According to ASUS, this SKU will only be available in North America much later in the year. The next tier costs an extra $300, and that bumps up the CPU to an i7-12700H with more threads and an RTX 3050. You can only pre-order this SKU at the moment, and the sample that I have over here costs a little shy of 2 Gs. And ASUS went all out by throwing in a Core i9-12900H, twice the storage capacity, and an RTX 3050 Ti. The good news is that you can actually buy this right now from Best Buy. Now, one thing to note is that all these SKUs will share the same 13.4-inch 1200p 120Hz display, but more on that later. And for those of you wondering about the XG Mobile, let me just tell you, this external GPU dock is incredibly hard to find. It still costs $1,500 for the RTX 3080, and if you want to go Team Red, ROG has actually launched a newer model this year with the Radeon RX 6850M XT GPU with 12 gigabytes of VRAM for $100 less. It's always refreshing to see some AMD love, but if you ask me about availability, all I can say is good luck finding one, my friends. So now that you know how much these things cost, what's it like to use it every single day? Well, let me start off with the exterior design and handling. They've taken a lot of inspiration from the ROG mothership that was launched a few years ago and gave it a bit of a modern touch. ROG is calling it retro futurism, which inherits the sci-fi and spacecraft themes, and it looks unique. The entire chassis is made out of CNC milled aluminum with a few Easter eggs sprinkled here and there. For instance, the 06 vent cutouts over here signify the year that ROG was established. And if you take a look at the numbers over here by the kickstand, 181507 is the numeric representation of ROG, and these coordinates right by the transparent window directs you to their main headquarters in Taipei. Now, speaking of this window, it's a cool design choice that peeks straight into the main board that's powering this entire tablet. Plus, it's LED lit by RGBs, and you can play around with the effects through Armoury Crate. But personally, I think it's a little bit too much, especially when you compare it to the Flow X13. It just loses that stealth and discreet vibe. It's certainly going to draw a lot of attention when you're using this thing at a coffee shop or let alone just sitting in class. I'm not really into it, but I'm sure a lot of people will love this theme. But I am a bit concerned about this window though, because if it breaks, stuff could get in and that could potentially lead to a disaster. In terms of handling, I would give this a 6 out of 10 because it is quite chunky for a tablet weighing in at 2.6 pounds or 1.8 kilos. And to give you a little bit of context, the Microsoft Surface Pro 8 is almost 28% lighter than the Z13. It's a lot thinner too. The Surface Pro is also more comfortable to hold in the hand due to the smooth edges compared to the squared off and aggressive design on the Z13. Again, this is when you use this thing in tablet mode, and you also have to realize that the specs packed inside this device is just way more powerful compared to the Pro 8. But if you choose to use it in desktop mode with the kickstand, the weight factor just fades away. Now, speaking of the kickstand, it can tilt all the way up to 170 degrees, and there is a subtle red tab that makes it easier to open, which is pretty cool. Now, while I'm using this thing in tablet mode, I might as well just talk about the display. Now, ASUS has given it a 16:10 aspect ratio screen that spans across 13.4 inches, and it's great. It's an IPS panel that's very similar to the ROG Zephyrus G14, with the exception of the resolution since it's 1200p versus Quad HD+. But I'm not complaining because I scaled it to 100% by default, and given that it's a touchscreen, every input works just as it should, and it's pretty flawless. I can't really complain about it. Now, it also has stylus support, so you could use something like this to expand your creative skills. The color reproduction, though, is not on par with some of the other thinner light laptops or even the Surface Pro 8. As you can see, it only covers 100% sRGB, 75% Adobe RGB, and 78% P3. It's not bad or really good. It's just good enough for streaming, maybe a little bit of content creation, and definitely you can get away with gaming because it's got 120 Hz refresh rate, which is awesome. Plus, the sustainable peak brightness level is excellent. Our unit was able to get over 500 nits, which I'm sure is a godsend when you're using this thing outdoors for everyday tasks. Now, ASUS is also offering a 4K option for this tablet, but they would only bundle it with the RTX 3080 GPU dock for $3,300. That's a lot of money, people. But you know what won't cost you that much? Checking out today's video sponsor. Yep, you didn't see that coming, did you?
The view is spectacular indeed with the Corsair Xeneon monitor. 32 inches of gorgeous goodness with 165 Hz refresh rate, QHD resolution, and plenty of streamer-friendly features, including IQ support for OSD, so you can enjoy your screen with zero dead pixel guarantee. Check it out below.
All right, so let's talk about some of the other things that come attached to this tablet, like the power button, for instance. It's located on the right-hand side, which also doubles as a fingerprint reader. Unfortunately, there is no support for Windows Hello like the Surface Pro 8, so if you want a quicker method of logging into the device, this is the only option, and it works really well. I had no issues with accuracy, but the sleep-wake timings are not as fast as I expected. The volume rocker is located underneath is well-defined, and it adjusts the volume in 2-step increments. The included 100-watt power adapter is pretty compact, and it charges the tablet via USB Type-C. It also supports fast charge, so it can juice up the battery from 0 to 50% in just 30 minutes, which is pretty cool. And the cherry on top of that is that the RGB LEDs that are right underneath the transparent window showcase that feature of it charging, which is also really nice. Now, I have to give credit to ASUS for including the keyboard cover with the Z13, unlike the Surface Pro 8. Fun fact, this whole setup that I have over here costs hundreds of dollars less than that device. But regardless, you are getting an Alcantara material in black, which is very soft to handle and type with, but it does pick up lint and all sorts of debris easily, so you have to pay extra attention to keep it clean. It also borrows a few other traits from the Microsoft Surface type cover by using the magnetic pin port that just simply snaps onto the bottom of the tablet, and you can also angle the keyboard for a better typing experience. Now, I would be extra careful when detaching this tablet since I cracked the edges holding the pins for the keyboard. So now every single time when I turn on the device from sleep mode, the keyboard wouldn't really respond. I would have to detach it and then attach it back again for it to work. So yeah, just a word of caution, my friends. The keyboard layout is pretty standard, and the switches offer great travel with satisfying feedback when you bottom out. They've also managed to include RGB lighting, and it looks pretty sweet. Keep in mind that the lighting system is linked to the transparent window LEDs, so that means that you won't be able to adjust the lighting separately. The trackpad is great. It's using a glass surface, so navigation is super smooth. It's literally the exact same feel as the Surface trackpad, including the well-defined primary left and right buttons. The surface area is too small in my opinion though, but that's because if you know me, I'm so used to bigger trackpads. This one just feels a bit too small, but big hand problems, man. This is what the webcam looks like. It is a 720p sensor, so don't expect the greatest quality compared to the Microsoft Surface Pro 8. Now, I keep making these comparisons because both these tablets are pretty much in the same category, except one is just way too powerful and it's specifically meant for gaming compared to the other one, which is more of a productivity device. But, you get the idea of what I'm talking about. The microphone sounds pretty good. I have enabled AI noise cancellation through Armoury Crate, and I do have a mechanical keyboard right over here. And as I'm typing, you can tell that it does a really good job at isolating background noise. So if you're in a business meeting or anything like that, this feature will come in super handy. The speakers are okay. The trebles are good, but there's just no bass whatsoever. So just keep your expectations low. The port setup on this tablet is actually limited, but that's to be expected for a device of this form factor. On the left-hand side, there's a Thunderbolt 4 Type-C port and a silicon cover hiding the proprietary jack for the XG mobile dock. But if you look closely, there is a Type-C port that can also be accessed without the dock, so that's 2 in total. Now, this silicone cover can easily be misplaced, so watch out for that. Switching over to the right-hand side, there is a full-size USB Type-A port, but guess what? It's 2.0. That's right. A 2.0 port on a 2022 device. Now, I don't know if ASUS is trolling us or if this is just an engineering limitation, but I was just really perplexed when I discovered this. The built-in DAC, on the other hand, is pretty solid. Personally, I do find it a bit too bass heavy, but I do know a lot of people prefer that kind of style. There is also a micro SD card slot hidden underneath the kickstand, which I think is a generous feature for expanding your storage. And now keep in mind that this is a tablet and not a laptop, so upgradability is very limited. The only user upgradable option or component is the M.2 2230 NVMe SSD. Everything else is soldered onto the PCB, including the memory. And the drive speeds are really fast. You are getting over 3 GB per second, both read and write performance, which is much faster than the Surface Pro 8. When it comes to battery life, the cards are stacked against the Z13. First of all, it's got the smallest battery capacity here at just 56 watt-hours, and it also packs Alder Lake, an architecture that hasn't been known for its overall efficiency so far. So it ends up dead last in this test and a good hour and a half behind the Flow X13. But if you think about this in a bit of a larger context, 7.5 hours should still give you enough for a day worth of use, but I just wish ASUS had found a way to cram a bigger battery into this thing. And you can really see how the Z13 suffers when you hit this with a heavier load. At under an hour, you're really gonna wanna keep it plugged if you're doing anything other than just document work or web browsing. All right, I think it's time to discuss the performance coming out of this 12mm gaming tablet. I mean, it's rocking a high-end Alder Lake processor, and it even has a discrete GPU. There's just a lot of stuff crammed inside this small piece, or inside this small space, and that usually means some sacrifices somewhere, right? Well, let's take a look at how ASUS has addressed this with their 3 power modes. Both turbo and performance act pretty similar in their behavior, except one levels out at 50 watts, while the other runs the 12900H at just 37 watts, which is actually below Intel's base power. Now, this really makes me wonder why ASUS didn't just use Intel's Alder Lake P series here, especially when you consider their PL2 phase only lasts for about 5 seconds instead of the usual 20 to 30 seconds. And then there's silent. And while it's meant to be super quiet and efficient, the CPU's performance gets completely kneecapped and it ends up running at just 14 watts. You can see how this affects frequencies too, and remember, we're taking an average of the P and E cores here. Even then, under an all-core load, the P and E cores barely hit 100 MHz above Intel's base clock in performance mode. I mean, using the below base power while getting higher than base frequencies does point to ASUS doing some CPU tuning, but I really wish there was a bit of a higher setting for the 12900H. Anyways, turbo is quite a bit better overall, and if you look at silent, well, that's just so low. you'll never want to do any intensive work with it enabled, since the performance will probably be a lot worse than a low-end budget laptop. But there's some really good news here too, and that's the cooling system. In every single mode, temperatures are incredibly well managed. They're actually so good that I wish that ASUS had taken this thermal headroom and allowed the Z13 to run at a bit higher power levels. I mean, I would have been totally okay with temps in the high 70s if it meant more CPU performance. So that's how the processor is handled. But remember, there's also an RTX 3050 Ti packed into here as well. And here, at least, the GPU is actually running a bit above NVIDIA's baseline power of 35 watts, with both performance and turbo hitting a consistent 40 watts average. And if you look at silent, well, it's not as bad as it was with the CPU, but look, you won't get much performance out of any GPU running at just 26 watts. GPU speeds are pretty much consistent with the input power, but there's something interesting going on here. It looks like despite performance and turbo modes sucking down the same amount of juice, turbo is able to hit a bit more higher frequencies through the entire test. I mean, it's just 50 to 80 megahertz most of the time, but there's definitely something causing it. And you can see exactly what's causing that slight increase too. It looks like NVIDIA's boost algorithms can take advantage of performance mode operating at a bit lower temperature since it's running a few degrees hotter than turbo. But look, hot is a relative term here since the RTX 3050 Ti runs super cool in every mode. I'm a bit surprised by how low the temperatures were, but maybe I shouldn't because we did see something similar with the Microsoft Surface Pro 8. Let me explain what's going on here with some thermal shots. I think the best way to describe this is to say these tablet-style laptops take advantage of the basic law of thermodynamics. In other words, heat rises. With fresh air intakes positioned at the bottom and hot air being exhausted out the top, airflow is super straightforward. The vertical flow stack is a lot better managed than the horizontal layout of a standard laptop. And the other nice thing about this layout is all the hot air is completely separated from your typing surface. You can actually see this with the acoustic performance as well. A more natural vertical airflow direction allows ASUS to run their fans at relatively low levels while still getting more than enough fresh air to the internal heat sinks. I mean, other than in silent mode, this thing isn't completely silent by any stretch of the imagination, but it's too far from loud too, and that's really impressive when you consider the temperatures. All right, so with that out of the way, I think it's time to start talking about performance, but like I always do lately, I need to set the stage a bit. And that's because the specs of laptops are starting to matter less and less these days, because the amount of power being pushed to components has more of an impact than higher-end hardware. So let's take a look at all the devices that you're going to be seeing in our results. First of all, the Z13 has almost identical power specs as last year's Flow X13. Technically, that should make for an interesting comparison between the 12900H and the 5900HS when both are used in a low power environment. The same thing goes for the RTX 3050 Ti and GTX 1650. The other thing I need to point out is that both flows are completely going to be outclassed by any other gaming laptop we've tested when it comes to in-game frame rates. That's where the external GPU dock comes into the equation. And hopefully those will allow for a bit more level playing field against similarly priced devices. So starting off with Cinebench, and I want to mention right away that anything you see in these charts with the red bar is the Flow Z13, while the X13 uses a darker blue here. And right away, you can see that even though it has a lower power envelope, the Alder Lake architecture really loves this benchmark. And that means the Z13 is pretty competitive overall. The single-core results show about the same thing too, and that should translate into pretty good frame rates in CPU-limited games. The rest of the real-world benchmarks are pretty straightforward. The lower input power results in the Z13 trading blows with the X13. Sometimes it wins, sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on the test. But in general, it loses by a pretty big amount against larger laptops that are running their processors at higher power levels. I mean, look. The Blade 15's 12900H is chewing down only 8 watts more, and while that might not sound like much, it makes a world of a difference for overall performance, especially in longer tests like Maya. Moving on to Premiere, and this is where Intel's processors really do shine, but the RTX 3050 Ti ends up holding back performance in a big way. But that's where the external dock comes into the equation. It turns a pretty good overall result into one that's pretty amazing. The only issue here is the performance increase isn't as much as it could have been because Intel's integrated graphics isn't being used anymore for secondary encoding tasks. The same thing goes for Resolve. Without that dock installed, the time it takes to render our test is actually worse than the X13. And when you add the dock, things just change completely for the Flow series. I would actually really recommend getting this thing if you're a creator. While the Flow Z13 itself is pretty decent in NLEs, the XG Mobile turns it into a beast for renders. The gaming results need a bit of an explanation too, since there's going to be a whole lot going on here. Now, just to make things easier for you guys, the Z13 with and without the mobile dock will be in red, while the older X13's frame rates will be in orange. Now, what you'll also see is that the flows without the dock are on a whole different level, and yet overall the gaming results pretty much speak for themselves. The Z13 has the capability to be one of the absolute fastest gaming tablets on the planet when paired up with the XG Mobile Station. And sure, there are some situations where the lower wattage processor holds frame rates back a bit, but in most situations, you're going to see a performance that's triple or even close to 4 times of what you get with the tablet alone. Now, where this lies in relation to the Blade 15 really goes to show how important it is to pay attention to GPU wattage when buying a laptop too. So, final thoughts on the Flow Z13. There's a lot to like about this tablet. It's got a really bright and fast display, it's super portable, and the performance is just really good. Although the 12nm inside this thing isn't just being utilized to its complete potential. And I think that's the problem, because you're now sacrificing a bit on battery life, and because this is geared towards portability, you just have to make sure that you're closer to an outlet, often when you're running intensive tasks on this machine. And I gotta be honest, this design is just way too much, guys. It's a cool showcase piece, but in reality, would you really consider carrying this? Let me know in the comments if you're in the same boat as I am, and if you're not, then that's completely okay. Personally, if I were to choose between this or the Flow X13, I would hands down pick the X13 all day, any day, because of the power efficiency and performance that you get with Ryzen CPUs, because that's just amazing. And I do like the stealth vibe that I get with that device, and it just makes more sense when you pair it with the XG Mobile. Asus, hats off once again for creating something really cool, but I just wouldn't go out and buy one, you know? On that note, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're able to take away everything that you needed to know about the ROG Flow Z13. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments. I'm Ibra with hardwarecanucks. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Oh, and before I forget, spend responsibly.